Good morning. This is Eric Blank, and this is the Commissioners' deliberation meeting in the Public Service Company DSP and VPP proceedings 24A-0547E and 25A-0061E. Mr. Mendelson, get us going.
Alrighty, good morning, Commissioners. I'm Mike Mendelson, your advisory team. Today we'll be taking up matters related to cost recovery and specifically GMAC eligibility and logistics. And hopefully we'll finish off the HCA and other data issues. Mr. Fetters will lead on both of those, and Ms. Dundas will provide some legal framing at certain points. I'll try to help out where I can too. So I'll turn it over to you now, Mr. Fetters.
Sounds good. Good morning, commissioners. Can y'all hear and see me okay?
We can.
Excellent. I am Ian Fetters with y'all's advisory staff here once again to talk about the Grid Modernization Adjustment Clause, or the GMAC. At last week's deliberation, we talked about the general framework of the GMAC rider proposed by PSCO in this proceeding, as well as the GMAC's roots in Senate Bill 24-218. We had a wide-ranging conversation on the categories of spending that PSCO proposes would go through the GMAC, and also went through a few decision points on how the GMAC should be treated, mostly related to regulatory process. This week, we will return to some of those topics, delve more into performance-based framework, and continue going through decision points. So to give a quick recap, PSCO is requesting recovery of distribution costs through the GMAC in 2026, 2027, and 2028. There are four major groups of costs which PSCO is proposing to go through the GMAC. First, there are 24 and 25 distribution activities, which are currently being recovered in the Transmission Cost Adjustment, or TCA, and more specifically, the distribution rate component of the TCA, which I'll call the TCAD. The company proposes that these TCAD costs be rolled into the GMAC along with true-ups for 2024 and 2025. Second, there is Equipment to Advanced Distribution Activities, or EADA, which refers to a specific subset of equipment contemplated for recovery under Senate Bill 24-218 and are also currently being recovered through the TCAD. Then there are what the company is referring to as Type 1 distribution activities and Type 2 distribution activities. Type 1 is the descriptor the company uses for spending that they contend strategically or affordably furthers state goals. Under the company's proposal, this spending would go through the GMAC in its entirety. The company proposes to include the entirety of the capacity and asset health and reliability budgets as Type 1, as well as IT operational technology, some AGIS investments, and undergrounding projects. Type 2 is the descriptor the company uses for other distribution spending that does not strategically or advance or benefit state goals. Under the company's proposal, the spending would go through the GMAC subject to performance-based framework. The company proposes that Type 2 would include extensions for new service if those service extensions do not serve policy goals, relocation of distribution infrastructure that is not expected to result in increased capacity, reliability, or resilience, street lighting investments, and investments in fleets and tools that are not necessary to support capacity, reliability, or resilience. To get some of the opening stuff out of the way, I would like to open by talking about the eligibility of cost categories outside the discussion of ongoing distribution activities that could flow into the GMAC. This includes the TCAD and EADA roll-in, as well as VPP administrative costs, and then we could get into the meat of the ongoing distribution activities, if that sounds good.
It does.
Alrighty then. Opening with the TCAD, to recap, the company is proposing to collect a revenue requirement of approximately $46.2 million annually for 2024 and 2025 distribution activities. They are being recovered in what's known as the TCAD, a component of the Greater Transmission Cost Adjustment. Staff opposes the company's proposal to roll in the TCAD revenue requirement into the GMAC and instead argues that those 2024 and 2025 distribution activities be kept separated from the GMAC revenue requirement. In rebuttal, PSCO points to decision number C240720, which stated the true-up for 2025 expenditures on distribution activities should be addressed as a feature of the GMAC. PSCO also claims that grouping distribution costs together would be more understandable for customers. Advisors emphasize that this is mostly a question of geography, and whether the TCAD is rolled into the GMAC or not, the revenue requirement associated with those distribution activities would not be different. There was also a question last week of whether the TCAD would be rolled into base rates if there is a phase one rate case, which could potentially be filed pretty soon. And advisors have confirmed that the TCA tariff includes language which resets the TCA to zero after these costs are rolled into base rates. So if distribution costs do remain in the TCAD, they would likely not be there too much longer. And I will pause for discussion.
I mean, I'm fine with the company's proposal, putting it in the GMAC in this case. I think it has virtually no implications given that it gets zeroed out in the next rate case. So I don't much care either way, and I think that's where my colleagues preferred in our discussion last week. But Commissioner Gellman, anywhere you'd like to go?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's essentially the same money being collected independent of the location. I will just say we'll be on a fairly short time frame for the advice letter coming for the next GMAC, so that may have some bearing on if this is really the best way to go or not. I mean, I'm not opposed to the company including it in the GMAC, although I kind of acknowledge it's possible they might consider that just too complicated right now, and I understand we'll have likely a rate case fairly soon. And so this will be resolved one way or another quite quickly. But I'm not opposed to them rolling it in if they determine that's really feasible in the time frame.
So is your preference to let the company decide what it wants to do?
I mean, it's quite a short time frame for the GMAC filing. So I think it's certainly fine for them to roll it in. They've indicated that's their intent. I could also see a potential future where that feels pretty complicated or, overly complicates the GMAC filing in a very short time frame. So if so, I guess they would just submit a waiver or something if they intend to not roll it in, if we approve them to roll it in.
Commissioner Kaplan.
Yeah, I mean, kind of the same place. I think the appropriate place for it is the GMAC, but I mean, it doesn't have a material difference in terms of, collection. It's just sort of where is the best place for it to be. It seems like the appropriate place is the GMAC, but as you've pointed out, that may meet with some difficulties in terms of timing, but I would just go along with the company's proposal to roll it into the GMAC.
All right. So, Mr. Fetters, I'd say there's a 3-0 vote. Finding that the GMAC is the appropriate place for this spending, but we recognize, consistent with the company's rebuttal, but finding that where we'd be flexible depending on procedural and administrative necessities or requirements. So hopefully that gives you what you need to draft the order.
I think it does. I think they've calculated the revenue requirement up to this point, so they should be able to put that in. But there is also the true up calculation and all. There are a lot of moving parts, so that should give information for an order. The next item we have on our list are VPP administrative costs. As background, Senate Bill 24-218 says a qualifying retail utility shall recover costs to facilitate a VPP program, including foundational technology costs or investments, O&M expense, operating technology costs or investments, and IT costs or investments through the GMAC. PSCO requests that these administrative costs be recovered through the GMAC, and staff also agrees that these costs must be recovered through the GMAC. And I can pause for questions or have a recommendation.
Yeah, we'd take your recommendation.
Advisors recommend including these costs in the GMAC consistent with staff's recommendation and the language in Senate Bill 24-218.
Commissioner Gellman?
I agree.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
As do I. And I know the next one on the list is EADA, but if we could take that up maybe as part of the category by category analysis, I think that'd be great. Mr. Fetters, would that work for you?
Sure, that sounds good. So having those opening items out of the way and EADA moved down, we will next go through some of the more high-level questions on GMAC framework and design. The first one is generally whether to endorse the Type 1 and Type 2 framework suggested by the company. We talked pretty extensively about the company's interpretation of Type 1 and Type 2 last week, and I gave a quick recap about it in this morning's preamble. Essentially, one category, Type 1, that would go through the GMAC in its entirety, and another that would go through the GMAC subject to performance-based framework. And again, this decision point is extremely high level, not meant to get into the meat of performance screens or framework, just kind of how we're thinking about the categories big picture. And I'll leave it to y'all for discussion.
Yeah, I'd just say, as you define type 1 in the preamble, I was fine with, but I'm not sure that's how Excel defined it throughout this process. But for me, type 1 is spending that both advances the 7B1 statutory goals and is found by this commission to be affordably and strategically advance those goals under 7B2. So as long as both those elements are in the definition of type 1, I'm good with it. And then that I would view as authorized to receive mandatory statutory GMAC recovery. And then for me, type 2 spending is all other non-type 1 spending that is potentially eligible for discretionary performance-based cost recovery. So that's how I'd say it. I'm not sure it's exactly how the company said it, but if we're all on the same page, then, and which I think is how you defined it in the preamble, then I'm good. So, but Commissioner Gilman, anywhere you'd like to go?
Yeah, I generally agree with your kind of definition and buckets and refinements to the company's suggestion around type 1 and type 2.
Commissioner Plant?
I agree.
Mr. Fetters?
Sounds good. And I will clarify that, yes, I think your recap there matches with Excel's definition, and I might have been a little on the shorthand side in the opening. But yes, both furthering state goals affordably and strategically would be type 1, I think, under everybody's read here.
Okay.
So now that we agree on that, the next question we have is, does the commission accept the company's proposal regarding implementation of the performance-based framework? And again, this is not quite yet getting into the performance screens themselves, but rather sort of the regulatory treatment around them. In its direct testimony, the company proposes that in any given year, the revenue requirement would be calculated for the total pool of type 2 activities, and then the percentage included in that year's GMAC would be calculated based on the company's performance on the applicable performance screens in that same year. For instance, if year 2 of the GMAC, the company does not meet all the applicable performance screens, then the revenue requirement would be reduced for all type 2 recovery in that year, even if projects went into service in year 1. Because the performance in a given year can't be known in advance, the company proposes to include all Type 2 activities at 100% value in the November 1st advice letter filing and projected rate, and then include any adjustments for underachievement in the April 1st true-up filing after the fact. While parties have a plethora of recommendations on the performance-based framework in general, PSCO's proposed mechanical application of the performance-based framework to Type 2 activities has largely been undiscussed on the record, but the decision point is whether to approve PSCO's application of the performance-based framework, where the AL would start with 100% recovery of all Type 2 investments, and all Type 2 investments would be clawed back across the board for failing to meet performance screens based on the relevant year. And I'll turn it over to y'all for discussion.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in first again. For me, I would not accept the company's proposal. First, I'd interpret the statutory language in section 7B3 as permissive, in that it says that cost recovery may occur through the GMAC. So unlike type 1 spending, where cost recovery is prescribed by the must language in 7B2, I view this as discretionary to the commission, so long as we comply with the limitations in section 5E if we do approve any performance-based mechanism. Second, for me, I'd like to see the cost recovery linked to performance improvements that have occurred at the same time when the type 2 spending projections are placed in the GMAC. The company's approach where type 2 costs are awarded accelerated cost recovery, and then somehow the regulatory process must claw back the accelerated recovery depending on a subsequent performance evaluation doesn't really work for me. For me, the improvement must have occurred by the time the projected type 2 costs are going to be placed in rates for performance-based accelerated cost recovery. Third, I would not include all type 2 investment, but would restrict it to some amount that is determined in this case through a category by category analysis that I think will be part of our discussion later today. Fourth, I'd like to see a broader set of statutory goals included in the performance-based approach beyond those that were identified in Section 5E, which, consistent with Ms. Valentine's answer testimony, I would view as a non-exclusive minimum list of requirements given the may language in Section 7B3. Finally, I don't think it's possible to develop on this record some mathematical formula that obligates certain levels of performance-based accelerated cost recovery. I'd rather see the exact level of cost recovery based on a future process in this case. So we'll talk about all these issues more in the coming discussions. But for now, for all these reasons, I'd use the discretion offered in the 7B3 may language to decline to approve the company's proposal, which is the limited decision before us in this particular discussion. So that's where I'm at. I would not approve the company's proposal, and I have some ideas about a suggested way forward. But for now, Commissioner Gilman, what do you think of the company's proposal? And why to the extent you want to talk about why?
Yeah, thanks. No, I think you lay out a pretty thorough reasoning as to why kind of preemptively assuming that costs that are not required to go into the GMAC should go in full and then somehow be clawed back, which feels pretty messy. Also feels like we could end up with very lumpy GMAC, and the GMAC is proposed to be very big. So, you know, it could just get quite odd and unpredictable in terms of what customers are seeing for billing. So I'd much rather have a better thought through process, kind of as you've indicated. So I don't really at a high level disagree with any of your comments. So curious to see on the other decision points where we can end up. But yeah, broadly, I would agree with you in rejecting the company's proposal as to the 100% recovery of type 2 and the clawback feature.
Commissioner Plan.
Yeah, I agree. I think the company proposed a sort of a bass backwards approach to performance recovery. Yeah, I agree with you.
Maybe council can put that in our order in a more elegant way, but maybe not. Keep going, Mr. Fetters.
Sounds good. So we will now talk about the performance screens themselves. So the first conversation, I think, is around the interconnection screen that has been proposed by the company and what it should entail. According to Senate Bill 24-218, the performance-based framework must consist of applicable interconnection timelines. For this DSP, PSCO proposes to use the existing timing requirements for the interconnection of distributed energy resources, or DERs, established in the Commission's interconnection procedures and standards. As proposed by the company, if the average number of DER interconnection days late is 0 relative to this requirement, the company would be authorized recovery of 100% of its Type 2 activities. The percentage would decrease on a sliding scale until 60 days late on average, when the recovery of Type 2 activities would be 0. SWEEP and NRDC propose that the company should be required to exceed the minimum commission requirements rather than meet them to fully recover Type 2 activities through the GMAC. While SWEEP and NRDC acknowledge that they are not experts on interconnection policy, they suggest that meeting the commission-required minimum timeline should result in no more than 50% of Type 2 activities receiving recovery. SWEEP and NRDC argue that performance-based framework is intended to reward utilities for improving their performance, and PSCO's proposal would instead reward the company for doing exactly what it is already required to do. They also note that the Commission's concerns throughout the proceeding with PSCo's performance on other issues, such as customer service, and argue that these issues holistically support a performance-based framework that doesn't simply maintain the status quo. WRA additionally notes that under the company's proposal, the current performance of processing interconnection applications would have resulted in 100% GMAC recovery of Type 2 costs in 2024, that the company had been 40 days early on average in processing interconnection applications, further demonstrating that the company's proposed performance screen would not provide any incentive to improve the processing of interconnection applications. CEO also recommends the interconnection performance-based framework be such that the company cannot recover costs for distribution activities unless the company meets shorter interconnection timelines than those already incentivized through the interconnection of PIM approved in proceeding number 23A-0188E. In its rebuttal, PSCo continues to advocate for its proposed timeline, claiming that a heightened standard is not warranted nor contemplated by Senate Bill 24-218. And I will pause for discussion.
Yeah, I'll jump in and suggest a process approach to address this. In terms of developing the interconnection screening for Type 2 cost recovery, I propose having the company file in this case by June 1st, 2026, the 2025 interconnect data in the same form as it's presented the 2024 data in response to discovery request WRA 2-20, along with a proposal about how much of the cap Type 2 cost recovery it thought it was entitled to recover based on the progress on reducing interconnect timelines and perhaps other statutory objectives that we're about to talk about. Given that filing, I then propose implementing a notice and comment process in June of 2026, in this case, perhaps like phase 2 of the ERP process, that would give the parties, say, 40 days to submit comments on the company's June 1st filing with some limited discovery rights. I then give the companies another 30 days to respond to the parties' comments. This would give the Commission 4 to 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks based on the notice and comment record, again, in this case, to issue a decision on the allowed cost recovery based on the company's progress on interconnect timeframes and other issues, which we'll talk about before the November 1st advice letter filing. If the company is not interested in pursuing the second avenue to obtain performance-based accelerated distribution cost recovery, then it can live with the Type 1 recovery. But it seems like this approach of having a second, more focused, accelerated performance-based cost recovery mechanism could create additional support for distribution capital spending if it was properly structured. So I guess the idea is to create a notice and comment process in 2026 that's like what we do in the ERP before the November advice letter filing, that would enable us to, based on the record at that time, in this case, set the Type 2 performance-based GMAC cost recovery. So I know this is hitting you cold, and we can bring it up again on a future one, but to me, I was just not able to get to like some mathematical formula where if you do this, then you get that. I just thought this record was inadequate to get there in any sensible way. So my suggested approach is to create more process. Again, in this case, next year, where we can review the interconnect issues, and I'm going to suggest some other things having to do with the statutory objectives, the grid modernization bill. So that's where I'm at. And again, we don't have to decide this now, but just curious where you're coming from, Commissioner Gilman. And
going 100 miles an hour. Yeah, I think this is similar to some lines I was thinking for how to deal with the performance-based more broadly. First and foremost, I would reject how the company has suggested to do it. I don't think it is rational that we are advancing state policy goals by simply providing 100% advanced cost recovery for something they're already required to do by rule. That, like, quite simply does not pass like a common sense test to me. And so I think it has to be more stringent than what is required by rule. We have the 2024 performance, which was significantly improved from the rule requirement. It would be interesting to see the 2025 data, although I don't know essential. I think the part of this I struggle with more is correlating what % of recovery to get for what specific performance, and to, I think, a subsequent decision point on what type 2 funding, on all of it, on just things that could have impacted interconnection. So just to make Mr. Fetter's life like really difficult, I think this is one giant whole organism we're going to have to talk about. So I wouldn't, I mean, I would say we could take a final vote right now, maybe to not do what the company said.
I think we already did that.
What exactly the follow-on process looks like to coalesce around what these actual performance screens should be and how they will get implemented, I think probably deserves some more discussion and is related to some of the subsequent decision points. So I don't want to jump the gun too much. I guess the one thing I would ask is why would we wait until June if they could have the, I mean, conceivably they would have the 2025 interconnection data significantly before June. Especially, I suppose it's being tracked in real time. You kind of have to know the timelines. So I'm pretty warm to the idea of a process like that, especially including trying to figure out additional performance screens, since I agree with you, there just was not enough engagement in that issue in this record to kind of cross that bridge right now. So yeah, happy to work on more of that. But for now, it's a no on the company's suggestion.
Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
Yeah, no, I largely agree with that. I have some similar questions around sort of the time frame. I know that what we want to do is try and get comments and rebuttal or whatever prior to the November 1. And so I haven't really like timed out what, how much in advance of November 1 everything needs to be in, or also when the data is available to do the evaluation. If we're just going to be evaluating, on 2025 as a, sort of a measure of those revenues that could be collected in 2026. And if we're doing that we're evaluating that in June of 2026 for the 2027 advice letter, if we're kind of 2 years behind. I haven't quite wrapped my arms around how the timing all works between the evaluation and the collection, what's being evaluated and what it's applying to. But generally, I think in terms of the interconnection screen or performance criteria, I'm in agreement. Just meeting the requirements isn't a big Yahoo jump up and down moment. And if we're going to have incentives, performance incentives, it should be for performing above the base level. So, but I do need to get some clarification around sort of how the evaluation ties into the collection, because I'm a little unclear on that.
All right. Well, I mean, we'll keep going today, and we're obviously going to have to bring this back to a future discussion. So do you want to jump to the next one, Mr. Fetters?
Yeah, that sounds good. And yeah, we are going to later talk about additional performance screens, as well as kind of the regulatory timing around June 1st, April 1st, that sort of stuff, which I think based on everything else here, we were already kind of anticipating would end up on the future CWM. So that sounds good. Next up is what criteria should be used to determine if type 2 recovery is appropriate for activities that the commission determines do not further a legislative priority. Essentially, Senate Bill 24-218 outlines 3 performance screens: interconnection timelines, which we just talked about, energization timelines, which Senate Bill 24-218 says are not applicable to the first DSP filed after Senate Bill 24-218 is enacted, and targets for flexible load and demand management, which Senate Bill 24-218 says are applicable to the second DSP filed after Senate Bill 24-218 is enacted, as well as subsequent DSPs. PSCO asserts that it is inappropriate to condition GMAC recovery on anything but those categories because the presumption is to assume that the list is an exclusive list, which means that the legislature already prescribed the 3 criteria in the performance-based framework. PSCO argues that the commission has no discretion to add to the list of performance-based criteria. And I think y'all have talked about it a little bit up to this point, but I will also pass to Ms. Dundas, your commission counsel, real quick to see if she has anything to add on this, and then we'll turn it over to y'all for discussion.
Ms. Dundas?
No, I think that the ship sailed on this discussion a little bit. I heard already from all 3 of you that there is intention to put additional performance-based criteria on the 7B3 GMAC eligible investments. I'll just note that that's an idea supported by WRA. In their SOP, they argue that the commission has broad authority to define the structure for recovery of type 2 activities. The statute doesn't limit the type or scope of distribution activities that may be classified as type 2 activities. They argue that the interconnection framework applicable for this one is the floor of what type 7B3 investments must be conditioned on, but does not establish a ceiling. Again, I heard a 3-0 vote that sort of endorses that reasoning and some intention to develop other performance-based criteria for 7B3 recovery this time. I'm just noting that there's at least party support for that idea in the record.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I agree with WRA in both its statement of position and Ms. Valentine's answer testimony that 5E is not an exclusive list, but rather a minimum list. And in support, I'd again refer to the may language in section 7B3, as well as the broader reliability and other objectives that are clearly outlined as core statutory goals. So, Commissioner Gilman?
No, I certainly agree with you, and I think here might be a helpful place to kind of rehash. Like, there's the DSP plan and DSP spending, and then there's what goes into the GMAC for this preferential advanced cost recovery, right? And so I think it's helpful to think of that in the context of these type 2 expenditures, which have not been shown by the company to affordably or strategically advance the state policy goals. I think it's perfectly rational that there are actual performance expectations on the company in order to take this funding that I think broadly we're saying, yes, you can spend as part of the DSP, but in order for it to get this really exceptional cost recovery treatment, it really needs to actually provide results. So I just thought that was maybe helpful framing. Certainly there's investment needed, but what we have a unique opportunity to do with the type 2 area is to really ensure that in order to get this reward of this advanced cost recovery, there are actual performance requirements to be made. So anyway, I agree, and hopefully that was a helpful clarification as to why it's appropriate, especially with regard to really kind of exceptional cost recovery in this case.
Well said. Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Commissioner Gilman put it pretty well. And I would just say that, having served in the legislature, I think comprehensive probably wouldn't be a good description. I think generally, unless they say and absolutely nothing else, I think generally the legislature puts in the floor, not the ceiling. So.
Uh, Ms. Dundas, did you want to add something here?
Just quick, Chair, uh, that's understand where you're going with this interpretation and setting up more frameworks, but just a reminder that I did hear that everyone agrees that at least that's the floor. So interconnection timelines that are required by statute to be part of the conditions should be part of the discussion today, in addition to whatever else you add to that.
Absolutely. And I think we all agreed with that. Mr. Fetters, you want to keep going?
Absolutely. The next two decision points on our list relate to type 2 as well, and we'll take them together here. The gist of it is, should GMAC recovery in this case be tied to any other metrics than those referenced in statute? And if so, what should those criteria and metrics be? Few specific items were prompted to parties in C25-066I, including reliability, resiliency, greenhouse gas emissions, and other items referenced in statute, as well as customer service metrics. In last week's deliberation, there was a general discussion of potential metrics, as well as some discussion earlier this morning. So I think y'all are primed to talk about it, and I will turn it over for discussion.
So I'd propose that we break it down sort of category by category, and I would start with reliability. And I would add a reliability metric to the performance-based mechanism, again, as suggested by WRA in both its answer testimony and statement of position. For me, this metric should involve the system-wide SAIDI, SAFE, CAIDI, CAFE, CEM 16, CLI 12, and CELI 24 metrics that are identified by staff in its outage and reliability report on page 11, hearing exhibit 502, attachment NGJB1 in this case, as well as any other metrics that seem relevant from the QSP report as modified by staff in its report. As part of this, I'd also like to see the company's progress in resolving the issues surrounding the 15 most problematic feeders in 2024, as again identified in the staff report. Like our discussion on interconnect, I would not set some prescriptive mathematical link as between performance and cost recovery at this time, but would leave any determination to a future process in this case. As such, I'd ask the company, if it is interested in this additional cost recovery, to file the 2025 and Q1 2026, to the extent it's available, reliability and outage metrics as part of a June 1st, 2026 filing, and inform the Commission of its progress since the staff report was filed in April 2025. Again, through the subsequent notice and comment process I just outlined, the Commission could determine how much accelerated cost recovery under what I would view as a cap would be permitted based on the company's progress in the year since the staff report came out in April 2025. And just as background, in its May 2025 letter in response to the staff report, the company has committed to quickly taking corrective actions to address the reliability and outage concerns. Likewise, at the hearing in this case, the company testified that it has already made substantial progress in responding to these reliability concerns. So presumably these efforts should already be well underway. Commissioner Plant, to your point about the timing. Finally, as WRA suggested in its answer testimony, I would exempt any direct weather-related impacts or other issues beyond the company's control from the analysis of how much progress has occurred. So it's viewing progress as independent of items like weather that are outside the company's control. So that's how I'd structure it. And again, I know this is hitting you cold, but and you may have different thoughts, but wherever you'd like to go, Commissioner Gilman.
I just have a question before I start. Do you have other areas as well for performance, or is this
Yeah.
off the list?
All
Okay.
right.
We're just talking
Oh,
about reliability.
do
No,
you want
I
me-
like bite-sized chunks. We'll
Okay,
just
so
talk about
we'll do it
reliability.
sequentially.
I think that's okay. I just
Okay.
wanted to like frame my headspace to be ready.
Well, I'll just not to ruin the surprise, but customer service for 2026, and then I'd like to for 2027 put in something about getting BE and EV loads off system peak. So those are my two other areas, and maybe
clarify,
some. Sorry,
sorry, to clarify, Chair Blank, when you say 2026 for customer service, that would be the June 2026 filing,
correct.
and then 2027 for
I have
EV
some
and
other-
BE would be the June 2027 filing for the 2028 GMAC.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to make sure.
Thanks. Anywhere you'd like to go, Commissioner Goman?
Okay. Yes, I think it's reasonable to include reliability to condition the type 2 spending. I think I'd like to look more at what's reported in the QSP to try and understand the linkage. Like, I don't want to reinvent the wheel or make new things that we track. I think like as cleanly as we can track this, I'm fine with removing major weather-related impacts. But as cleanly as we can track this, I think really avoids the opportunity for any like gamesmanship or unpredictable results or really like litigation, right? In these filings, like this should be pretty cut and dry data, hopefully. So I don't know right today if I would say like all the same exact metrics. The other thing I'm mulling is so your concept is this gets filed in June, and then the company kind of in a more takes these results and then in our discretion would determine how those impact the type 2 for 2026. I think that's fine. I mean, I'm always a fan of math, so I would love a direct linkage that is more predictable. Maybe that's too much for the first time, and I get that. It would be great if that's the ambition to get there, maybe not in the first year. So I can see some of that. And then with regard to, since we're not going to do the kind of advanced type 2 recovery and then the clawback, I'm just trying to think. Maybe Mr. Fetters has to help me. What we see in the 2026 fall filing for type 2 would actually be 2026 type 2 and 2027 type 1 funding.
It's projections. It's 2026 projections for 2027 spending.
Yeah, but if we don't allow type 2 to be recovered ahead of time, no matter what.
I have a thought around this just to throw out and see what you guys think. I mean, I've been thinking about the same sort of, that's sort of the timing issue that I'm trying to resolve in my head. But what if we were to basically make it a 3-year rolling thing? So, you start off 26 with 33% recovery for 26. You're going to do your evaluation in June of 26. That's not going to get resolved until the November 1 filing, which is for 27 recovery. But you could apply an additional percentage to your 26 that would then be recovered, would go into the 27 recovery based on performance. But it would basically use that, it'd be like a third, a third, a third. And, they could accelerate annual recovery, but through good performance. but without it, it would be spread out over 3 years. Does that make sense? I'm kind of trying to put the timing into my head as well, and I'm kind of coming up short.
I'm struggling. I think I need to see a spreadsheet about how that would work and, the dollars, given the current process and what you're proposing. But Mr. Fetters,
Yeah, I think we'll probably need to regroup on more complex timing of the actual investments themselves. With regards to the company's proposal, the advice letter filed in November 2026 that Chair Blank has talked about having a June 2026 filing previous to that to discuss would be for activities that occur in 2027. So it would still be investments on a projected basis, but it would be conditioned on performance, however y'all determine here, be it on historical metrics or otherwise.
So then what is it? What happens with 2026?
that is going to be an advice letter filing in 2 days.
Right, but if we're saying that that recovery is conditioned
No, that
on performance, so you would just give them 100% for 2026, or?
I would give them 100% of the type one that we deem to be strategic and affordable, and zero on performance based for 2026.
So the 22, I mean, I'm assuming type one that's going into the GMAC. It's 100%.
Okay.
We'll just take that off the table. But for the things that we determine are type two, in 2026, there would be no recovery.
That's what I'm proposing. And the first one for performance based would be in the November 2026 advice letter filing. And I'm suggesting a process before that to determine how much of that they've earned based on their improvements in all these different areas.
Okay, so then what would end up in the November 1 filing would likely be everything that was expended in 26 plus what they project in 27.
I would not put the 2026 spending in there. So there'd be zero recovery of type 2 spending from the 2026. I would just do type 2 for 2020, starting with the 2026 advice letter filing for 2027.
So 2026 expenses would go into a future rate case. 2027 and 2028 would be subject to the performance framework in terms of
That's how I'm proposing it.
Okay.
But I mean, I think the company did ask for like 8.7 million of type 2 in the the November 2025 advice letter filing, but I think we decided not to do that.
Gotcha.
Does that make sense, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I understand. I understand. I was trying to figure out what happens with 2026. I think I understand now. You're just saying that goes into rate case. 27 and 28 become subject to, looking at what the performance was. And I was just suggesting maybe instead of putting all of 26 in a rate case, you just sort of stagger it and make it over a 3-year rolling period. But yeah, I just didn't understand that idea.
I mean, I'm not opposed to that. I don't know, Mr. Fetters, anything you'd say?
I I think we would need to regroup a little bit on what specifically the rolling average looks like and how that would flow exactly. I don't think we have a decisive vote at this time up to
Yeah,
this
I think
point
that's an
on,
understatement.
well, we don't have a lot of decisive votes. I don't think we have a decisive vote specifically at this time on what to do with type 2, with type 2 for 2026, as y'all just talked about. So if we would like to vote on that here, we could do that.
I mean, I would do it as part of the comprehensive 2026 discussion on what's type 1, and then I do that out of the category by category discussion. I take Commissioner Plant's point that there may be a hangover issue, but Commissioner Gilman, you wanted to jump in?
No, I mean, I think coming into this, it sounds like thinking along the same lines as you, Chairman, that I think it's very important for the type 2 spending to have performance screens. And because that was really just not sufficiently litigated here, we're not going to go into 2026 with effective performance screens. And so, my thought coming in today was 2026 type 2 will likely not be awarded in the GMAC given the May ability, because the performance screens are not effective in the way that we think they would need to be. I think there is some opportunity to have those in place for the 2027, 2028 spending. I think there's a lot of work to be done on what that process is and where it happens and how that works. And then I think what we'll maybe have to work with Mr. Fetters on in the meantime, at least in like my vision of how it could work, is if we're not going to the prior point, not going to award the type 2 GMAC a recovery in the years in which it's like eligible. If we're not going to award that ahead of time and go with the clawback mechanism, I think what I'm hearing is if we have a performance screen, it would look at kind of the year before. And there's a little bit of a mismatch where it would look at the year before's performance, and then that would dictate the percentage of the prospective year of funding that you get, which is a little odd. That's why I said, well, is it actually 2026 type 2 spending that's in with 2027 type 1 spending in the fall 2026? Because that like matches up the actual time frame of performance with the time frame of spending. So I don't know. I think that is not going to be figured out live here, but it's this mismatch of when, I mean, and part of it is like this is what we have to work with the statute. We've got a prospective rider that some of it can be based on performance. It's hard to make those two concepts jive is entirely. So I think more needed here, but like coming in, my assumption about 2026, it sounds like was similar to the chair, that because we wouldn't have the performance screen in place, it would at least not be eligible in the advice letter filing coming this week.
Yeah, my only concern is that we don't provide an incentive to defer spending in 2026 because it would come after 2028 for recovery. Just because it wouldn't be a part of the performance framework. And if we can try and figure out some way to avoid that dynamic, I think it'd be good.
I mean, I'd like Commissioner Gilman. I don't have a way of linking spending directly to performance, given how prospective, how it's based on future projections. So I just think, the broader incentive of accelerated cost recovery motivates behavior. So if we put out the right targets where we want to go, we'll get the right behavior, even if the exact spending to get that result is not, exactly matched. Well, I guess, Commissioner Gilman, I'd be prepared to vote that for this advice letter filing and the projected 2026 spending, we're not going to do any type 2 accelerated cost recovery. because there's no performance based metric. Ms. Dundas, you want to jump in?
Just a reminder that there is going to be performance-based frameworks for interconnection pursuant to the statute. So a little bit of clarification there. And then second, there's just to put a finer point on it, and this is sort of why we wanted to go category by category, is there's the type 2 spending proposed by the company, which is, I don't have a number off the top of my head, but certain categories that they have already declared don't further a state goal and fall into the 7B3 category, which may be what you're talking about right now. But there's also the possibility that some of the spending that the company is asserting is type 1 ends up type 2 because you find in your analysis is required by statute that spending does not further a state goal. So you could make that vote now that there's no type 2 spending, but just wanted to create that clarification that there's sort of those two paths to being in the 7B3 category.
All right, why don't we just keep moving through the performance-based metrics, and we'll take up the 2026 spending comprehensively through the category by category analysis. Would that work for you, Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, that'll work for me. And honestly, the 2026 type 2 discussion might benefit from more in-depth discussion with advisors and counsel on this whole timing mismatch issue going forward, with what comes out of here. Because I'm with Commissioner Plant. I would very much like to incentivize the behavior we want to happen rather than just say, nope, doesn't qualify. And so I think we're really scrambling to make sure we have a way to do that. So anyway, yeah, I would just say that the 2026 type 2 recovery might get wrapped in this broader timing discussion on how we deal with the timing mismatches that are implied here.
And I just say, Commissioner Plant, you're changing my mind. Maybe there does need to be some type 2 spending in this advice letter filing to support the goals. Maybe Mr. Fetters, I'll just jump into the next thing on my list, which is the customer service. Does that make sense, or would you like to go in a different direction?
I think continuing with the general discussion of performance screens and which criteria should be looked at would be useful here.
Mr. Fetters, I was going to say the same thing, that I doesn't feel like you're going to make much more progress without talking internally first about the actual logistics of how this will work, but some agreement on what list of metrics so that we can think about that while developing the logistics is probably a good outcome of today's discussion.
I agree.
So I would also tie the accelerated cost recovery to customer service and billing metrics, which also seems like an important statutory objective. Hearing Exhibit 502, attachment NGB2 in this case, is a report presenting the results of a trial staff investigation into customer care and billing issues. The report identifies a series of metrics involving customer complaints, customer satisfaction, overall call response time, call termination numbers, and billing complaints. The staff report found that in 2024, the company's performance on each of these metrics had deteriorated substantially from prior historical levels. In addition to the staff report, hearing other service issues with larger customers were also discussed with several public service company witnesses. Although we can't directly link the performance-based cost recovery to energization timelines, given the statutory language pushing that off to the next DSP, I would like to at least request that the company file customer-specific energization information in its June 2026 filing, if that's what we do, about when it first heard from customers requesting energization, when the first application was received, when it was deemed complete, and any progress toward a more standardized approach to energization, and how these metrics changed over time. Again, I would not set some prescriptive mathematical link as between customer service performance and cost recovery at this time, but would leave any determination to a future process in this case, like I talked about before. And again, the idea would be the June 1st filing would talk about the progress made since the April 25 staff report. And again, through a notice and comment process, the commission can determine how much accelerated cost recovery under the cap would be permitted, but in part based on the company's progress. And again, in the company's response letter, they committed to quickly address these problems. And at hearing again, they said they testified that they've made some progress responding to these concerns. So presumably the timing would work. Commissioner Gilman, any comments on customer service and billing metrics?
Yeah, and you talked a little bit about energization as well in that. And I will point out, I think we need to initiate an energization timeline rulemaking. So just wanted to differentiate that is a separate thing. It's going to happen no matter what. And that will set the timelines for energization. And ideally, I think also net a lot of information about what this process is looking like and the customer experience and how those timelines should be set. So that's a separate effort going to happen and could happen in the relatively near future, I think.
So would you not ask for energization data here and just leave it to the rulemaking, which would be fine with me? I mean, I think
it's probably cleaner in the rulemaking.
Okay.
I
withdraw that.
Deal with all of that there. That's already going to happen, and I think can happen, at least can get started in relatively short order. We'll need to make sure we have all of the data available to really draft the NOPR. So that's a question. Do we have enough data around energization and timelines to draft the NOPR?
And you wouldn't ask for it here?
Not by June. I don't think that's helpful. I think we'd get it sooner and start a rulemaking sooner than June.
Okay. Anything else on the customer service or billing metrics? I'll stand down on the energization.
I was going to see if Ms. Dundas was going to correct me about anything around the energization.
Sorry, Commissioner Gilman. There is a decision point, a request by CEO that the company should track timelines and costs for energization for various load types and present that information in the next DSP. I think that's a different that's a different topic than whether you're going to condition money on it. I agree with you that performance-based framework as it applies is something for the next DSP pursuant to the statute, but I think it's an open question, and perhaps you just answered it, whether that order of tracking will happen here or not.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with the tracking. CEO suggests happening here, and I think this is an appropriate venue for that to kind of continue the data acquisition. But there's going to have to be a up till now, what is the current state of play? Where are we right now to get into the rulemaking and get a NOPR? And I think that necessarily happens as part of the rulemaking, because I probably see that being initiated before June. So I'm just not sure your June date is helpful to that effort, but yeah.
So rulemaking will be the venue to develop the framework and the criteria. Data acquisition will be ordered here, and neither will be nothing about energization will be part of the performance-based framework ordered.
Correct. Specific to energization.
Okay. Got it.
All specific to energization. Yeah. I think that's how I see things. So with regard to customer service outside of the energization, you would like to get reporting in June and then kind of take those results and consider those in the determination for the 2027 GMAC funding with regard to performance basis on type 2 spending.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how, so you'll have the June filing, then you'll have some comments back and forth. And then then the commission would make a determination. That's all before we get the advice letter filing. So we don't know the values in the advice letter filing, although I know that's another open discussion, how much transparency and insight there is into that ahead of time. So I'm just trying to understand how we, we wouldn't know the 2027 request yet.
I would propose to cap it. So the type 2 recovery would be capped at a lower level than the total amount they want to spend. At least according to my proposal.
So that's your outcome of getting the performance information. You'd say of
You
100% of
earned-
what you want to spend, you're going to get 50 in type 2, but we don't know what 100% value actually is.
Yeah.
I don't know if I endorse that exact idea, but I'm okay with tracking customer service issues. I mean, like, one thing that's difficult is this is like a really a major pain point for the customers. I mean, we're seeing significant concerns among customers. Yeah, it's difficult to see such an escalation of spending, such ambition about building out the system while failing at some of the most basic customer service requirements to provide this service. So I think like that is the linkage, is like,
That's where I'm at.
you have to provide a basically good level of customer service to your customers to even consider the next steps in improving and building out the system. So I'm okay with the linkage there. How it manifests and what the outcome, I think we need to work on is like, what is the outcome of that June? If it's June, what is the outcome of this separate process, and how does it then incorporate into a November advice letter filing? I think that's a bit of TBD right now for me, but I'm okay generally with tracking it and considering that as part of the company's important performance.
Commissioner Plant, I guess I'd say I'm fine with tracking the energization data in this case as proposed by CEO, but leaving the rest of it to the rulemaking. So I guess 2 issues for you: how you think about that energization issues, and whether customer service is something you want to see in these performance-based metrics.
Yeah, on energization, I agree completely. In terms of the customer service, I really do support the proposal. I think, it's actually in the company's name. But I think that having good customer service makes everything else that they're trying to do easier and better. And so it really needs to be a core component of this. What I do wonder, I mean, are we thinking about it in terms of, it sounds like we're kind of talking about it in terms of a qualitative evaluation, where I would prefer some sort of a quantitative evaluation, which I'm not sure if there's a way we can say this is the target, or if we just look at it and go, well, you're generally improving over last year, so you got it. It's sort of like I'm still a little fuzzy on exactly how we would implement it, and would tend more towards something that's clear and understandable, and that everybody knows if you achieve this, you get that. But in general, yeah, I support a customer service metric.
So on that last point, I'd suggest we put some language in the order requesting we develop more quantitative approaches, like both of you guys have talked about. But on this record, at this time, I don't know how to do it, and I'm not willing to wait till some process in 2027 to see if they're doing the basics on customer service and reliability and interconnect. So
But maybe for 26, you're looking for improvement, and then specific things would be developed.
Yeah. Does that make sense to you, Commissioner Gilman?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm getting is our main work between now and the next meeting, whenever we clean all this up, is what happens between June and November. What comes in, how's it analyzed, what's that process, and then what is the best description we can give of how that translates into how it would be treated in the discretionary GMAC spending. I want to provide as much clarity as possible. I very much agree that it's essential that the performance improves, but I think as explicit as we can be with what we have and don't have on this record will be a part of what we really need to work on for the next meeting to get as clear as possible, both with each other, but also with the stakeholders here.
Yeah. And I guess the last statutory goal has to do with this notion of flexibly and dynamically integrating supply and demand and seeing if we can't get the EVs and beneficial electrification off peak. So maybe there's some data filed in 2026 as part of the June or whatever date it is. And then and maybe in 2027, there's more of a binding link with accelerated cost recovery. But I think it's a major goal of this statute to dynamically integrate demand and supply. And I don't think the company's done that here. I think disproportionately it's showing a lot of this load showing up on peak. So that's another performance metric that for me, I'd like to link cost recovery to doing a way better job on that stuff. I don't know how to do metrics. I don't think it's possible to get improvement in the next year. But as a long-term goal, I'd like to really highlight that in this performance-based mechanism and in this order. So I don't know how you feel about any of that, but Commissioner Goman?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think one of the most major shortcomings of the company's failure and strategy here is really to forecast adding loads in an intelligent way. These are, to some degree, flexible loads, some internet connected. There are significant opportunities to have these loads be flexible. And I think what we've seen at almost every turn is a real lackluster pursuit of that ambition, down to almost no modeling at all of that ambition to make sure that we really are dynamically integrating these loads to optimize the performance and the cost of the system for all of the repairs. So I certainly agree with you that that's a really high level priority because it would enable direct benefit to all of the customers, right? In the way, especially because a lot of this statute, the promise is around beneficial electrification. The way the company is modeling it is not necessarily beneficial. It's just electrification. One of the core tenets of beneficial electrification is that it benefits the grid as a whole. And there's massive promise to provide additional load off of the system peak and year round with some of these loads. But that's not necessarily how it's being modeled. And we're not seeing, I think, a push that is meeting what we see as the urgency to really optimize this and be sure that not only are we planning the system to accept new loads, but that at the same time, we are really trying to ensure that that integration is as strategic and intelligent as possible so that we can minimize these costs for all ratepayers going forward. And so I have a similar priority, and I've kind of tried to toy around with, and to a large degree, whether it's flexible interconnection, VPPs, demand response, these all get to very largely the same goal, right? Which is to minimize the system peak, be sure the system is flexible enough that the load side of the system is flexible enough to respond to really kind of a new grid architecture where the generation dictates when the generation comes on to some degree, which is different than it was 20 and 30 years ago. And I think we all generally realize that, but we're not seeing that all come through in the planning. The load is a core part of the system, and it needs to be a core part of the system's flexibility and ability to do this in an affordable way. And so each of those things are just tools to get us there, right? To get us to the promise of ensuring that load best matches generation and does so in a way that's flexible enough to be a helper, not a hindrance to making sure that all of these needs can be served with a cost-effective and reliable system. And so I've tried to think like what, as we move forward, what could a framework look like? Clearly, there's a lot around load factor that we could be tracking and could be trying to improve upon. It's not just load factor, right? Like there's the system load factor, there's individual distribution system equipment load factors that things like VPP, flexible interconnect, would be looking to kind of optimize. But then there's also the integration of like the renewables as the generation source. So it's not just a totally flat load shape. We really want to be dynamically adjusting load shape to match our generation availability when possible. These things are trackable, like we can get there. And to me, I would rather be expressing that high level priority. The degree to which it's VPPs or company executed demand response or whatever, I'm more agnostic to be perfectly honest, and want to get the results. We need the system to perform in the most optimized way possible, and we need that to be the standard course of planning here. And I think a lot of our frustration here is that is clearly not the standard for planning that we're at, and we're really trying to figure out how do we make that be so? How do we provide the right incentives so that will be prioritized? So this is my long-winded way of saying, I generally agree with you. I think there's metrics we can look to. I would agree they're not here right now. Perhaps that's something, if there is a process going on next year that can be further refined in terms of getting some of the data with regard to load factors and things like that to better understand what is the current kind of benchmark and state of play here, and would have, a significant expectation that perhaps in the later years of this DSP, definitively in the next DSP, that this is a core feature of what is really tracked to ensure we're doing things affordably and strategically.
So I just say I agree with every single word you said, and think it's one of the central issues of current regulation. And would just to add on the fact that given the capital bias in current regulation, the company is not only incented not to do it right, but incented maybe to do it wrong, or that's the concern. And I think this case may be our only opportunity to create a performance-based incentive mechanism that can really alter that, potential bias towards capital solutions. So for me, I'd like to see a lot of accelerated cost. I mean, it's part of the reason why I've struggled so much with finding the type 1 affordable and strategic. And it's part of the reason why I would like to see a very significant 2027 incentive. And again, I don't know exactly how to define it, but large dollars available for cost recovery if they can meaningfully dynamically integrate the demand and supply. So I just throw that out there, given the incentives. And do you have any comment on that, Commissioner Gilman? Then I'll turn it over to you, Commissioner Plant.
No, I largely agree. I mean, I think we have struggled with years, and so there's a lot of frustration here in trying to ensure that we can really get movement on these things that will optimize costs and performance for customers over time. Because I agree with you. I mean, the natural incentive of the company is generally to do the opposite, to have the capacity needs be higher and build out for those. And that's not the best outcome for customers. And so, it's been kind of like swimming upstream for a long time to try and get them to do it. And I don't disagree with you. I think here we have a statute where that really appears to be the vision, is like this should be done strategically and affordably. And I think it gets to the concerns we've been expressing and really trying to solve in a number of venues, but not getting very far for years. And so this does appear to be a carrot. And again, I'll just indicate like the actual spending with regard to the DSP, if something is necessary, is a different matter. This is a huge incentive in terms of providing the company with money for those investments, in many cases before the investments are even made, with the assumption that we will strategically and affordably better achieve these state policy goals. And so that we have to stay laser focused on. And I think that necessitates really us ensuring there is more progress on this core issue.
Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything you both said. I'm kind of getting, I'm in my head here on what the best way of going about this is, because I feel like our strategy is an evolving one. I mean, the overall objective is to move this stuff out of peaks, and as you know, Commissioner Gilman was talking about, raise the overall load factor, sort of flatten things out, optimize the system, all that sort of thing. And that's the output and the outcome. I mean, what the company has right now for, you know, the two things that you mentioned, BE and EVs, is managed charging and thermostat control, which is basically, you know, their sort of centralized control of those things, which, you know, they haven't been doing particularly well as it relates to managed charging specifically. But some of that is now going to shift into VPP, right? For at least the coincident peaks.
Tiny
Uh,
amount,
and
25 megawatts.
yeah, 25 megawatts a year. Um, and and so, you know, I mean, I was thinking about, you know, some sort of a performance criteria of, you know, making sure that they've got 25 megawatts of aggregators signed up, you know, to make sure that they're actually meeting that target. But as I'm listening to the conversation, I'm thinking maybe rather than focusing on the input, we focus on the output. Because I mean, at the end of the day, that's where we're trying to get to. We're just trying to put in as many mechanisms to get there as possible. So, you know, I mean, maybe that's the thing to do, is to focus on the load shape as it relates to BE and EV, as opposed to focusing on the mechanism for getting there.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. I'm thinking, and we'll go through this later, but I'm thinking there's a significant performance-based incentive for the 2027 advice letter filing with fairly significant dollars, that is based on, you know, the BE EV load shapes. It's based on you know, what we're seeing in the forecasts. And it's not input driven, it's output driven. It's, have we significantly, as Commissioner Gilman said, implemented the vision of the statute to dynamically integrate demand and supply. And, you know, I don't know what the quantitative metrics are, but we definitely know it when we see it. And what we have in front of us now is not it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're giving them a number of tools,
Right. And a lot
to
of money.
accomplish the goal. It's just a question of if we're, you know, implementing the tools and accomplishing the goal. So, yeah, I'm shifting my view on that to more align with what you're describing, Mr. Chairman. I think that's a good idea. I
Commissioner
also don't know
Gilman,
what the metric is.
yeah, I mean, it's load shape and it's the forecast of BEs
Right.
and EVs that are feeding into the resource need and capital spending plan. But Commissioner Gilman, anything else on this, or do you have other? That's it for me. Those are my metrics issues that I want to see linked to performance-based accelerated cost recovery. Did you have others, or do you have other comments on this?
No, I think those are the high level ones. I mean, I think it's helpful for it not to be overly messy and
Right.
and that's why, I think I'm happy to hear we're kind of all in agreement that like the output is what matters. Let's get the result. You have a number of tools. I don't want to incent every tool. I want to
Right.
incent, did you
Right.
get where you got? And so I think there's a benefit to keeping it fairly simple and high level on these are the outcomes that matter and we need to get there.
Commissioner Plant, any other metrics or issues you want to see mention in the link to performance-based accelerated cost recovery?
No, I mean, as I said, I was, prepared around aggregator sign up, of capacity, performance on events of, exceeding 80% and all that sort of thing. But I think I think, I think that you're right. It's much more, it's easier and it's clearer, and it's also more tied to what our overall objective is, to just focus on the load shape and the movement of the load shape. And, I think that the tools that we've given them, we want to see them using all of them. But, if there's an incentive, a financial incentive for them to have, the best outcome, then I think they'll use the tools that we've created. So.
All right. Mr. Fetters, what next?
Sure. I just want to give a quick recap of what was just discussed, just to sort of lay it out for future use. So I think the only decisive vote that we had was with regards to energization, which was decision point 2.14 on the list, where energization will be developed as a framework with the criteria in the rulemaking. It will not be part of the performance-based framework for this DSP, but data related to energization should be tracked by the company to use in future DSPs as well as that rulemaking.
I would say it more broadly. I think we've had also have 3.0 agreement on a performance-based mechanism to do interconnect, reliability, the dynamically integrating demand and supply through BE and EV load shape. So I think we have agreement on the
And
metrics.
And
Or
customer service, I think you forgot.
Oh, and customer service. I think we have agreement on maybe capping the spending, although we have no discussion of what that cap is. And I think we have some agreement on the timing of that to try and do cost recovery. To the approval of the cost recovery is based on measured improvement, although we have some unresolved issues about whether the proposal I outlined is the right timing and has the right metrics, and that needs some more work. But I think we have 3-0 votes on the general principles behind it. So
yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Keep going, Mr. Fett.
I think that makes sense. I think I was not thinking of it in my head as decisive decision points just because there are so many factors to work out on the implementation of that stuff. But I do agree that it sounds like there is consensus overall on having metrics related to reliability, generally based on the QSP as well as staff's customer service report, and accounting for weather and large storm events in some fashion, that there will be look at customer service metrics, starting with the outage report that has been filed in this proceeding. And there will be metrics related to EVs, BE, demand response, largely focused on output on overall results more than the individual programs themselves.
I mean, I think that's generally right. It may not be how I'd say it, and I don't know that we need to wordsmith it. I suspect Ms. Dundas um, uh, can capture this discussion fairly clearly. But Commissioner Gilman, you want to add something?
Just one broad friendly amendment on the load shape issue. It's load shape. Like I don't discriminate against any type of load. I think there's reason to believe EVs and BE have unique capabilities to be more responsive, but we've got large loads coming online. We've got existing loads, existing electric heat. Like it is optimizing the load shape, especially to be dynamically integrated with generation. I don't care that it's all EVs and BE. I think obviously like those have huge potential to make huge improvements, but I would rather it be a more general reference.
I agree. It's just the large load is not part of the distribution system planning incentive PBR. So, but totally agree with that.
Not all of them. Some
Yeah.
larger.
Yeah, that's true. Not all.
Like there are larger users on the distribution system. There are plenty of industrial processes, different folks who can respond to different demand response. So I just want to be a little more inclusive.
Agreed. Does that work for you, Commissioner Plant?
Yes, it does.
All right. Where do we want to go next, Mr. Fetters?
Okay. I think we may come back to a couple of tracking things, but I think the next sort of big topic for discussion is the actual category by category discussion started last week's CDM. So we've talked about many of those, but Ms. Dundas, would you like to give any sort of intro before we get into the individual?
Yeah, and why don't we take like a little break till maybe 10:40 and then come back with a new subject? Would that work for you, Ms. Dundas? All right, let's take a break till 10:40 and we'll come back with a category by category. All right. Ms. Dundas, Mr. Fetters, lead us on.
Thank you, commissioners. So, as we said before the break, time to resume the category by category. And Ms. Dundas, would you like to open?
Sure, thanks, Mr. Fetters. So we did do a bit of this at the first deliberations, and here we are returning. Just a couple of thoughts to leave you before we go through the specific categories. As we discussed earlier, there's this type 1 and type 2 framework the companies presented that corresponds to 7B2 and 7B3 GMAC cost structure. For those activities that the company has asserted are type 1, meaning that they receive mandatory cost recovery under the 7B2 framework. It's your role today to determine whether that proposed distribution activity does benefit or advance a legislative priority found in 7A or 7B1. And did it do so in an affordable, or will it do so in an affordable and strategic manner? The commission needs to decide if that would, like, whether the company's proven its case enough that the commission can do that analysis, whether the activity does meet that 7B2 standard, or whether the activity furthers a state goal or at all. If it does not further a state goal, then that's that 7B3 category we discussed earlier. As I also mentioned, there's certain categories of expenses that are projected distribution activities that the company has labeled as type 2. And so for those activities, there's really no need to analyze whether they further a state goal in an affordable or strategic manner, because the company's already stated that they don't at this time make that case. So for those, it's more of a discussion as to whether recovery is appropriate under 7B3 or not. A couple thoughts on that strategic and affordable standard. As many parties have pointed out, neither term are defined by the legislator, nor does the commission currently have rules which provide a definition to guide you here. There's a couple quotes from SOPs in the record that might be helpful to start this discussion. Public service also does not define either term explicitly, but adds in SOPs that with respect to affordability, the company's proactive planning process results in affordable solutions to meet identified needs by efficiently deploying capital, integrating on an annual basis to ensure capital is deployed only when needed. This results in best long-term value for customers. Later in the quote, they say it would be short-sighted to merely analyze short-term bill impacts to assess affordability of highlighted budgets. Regarding strategic, Mr. Eiley provided the following definition at hearing. He stated that he looked up what strategy means, and that the general thrust of strategy is to be planning a system for longer term set of outcomes and planning for outcomes that are integrated into the broader scope of activity. CEO also notes that the statute doesn't define either term, and that must mean it is left to the commission's discretion to determine. CEO asserts that for distribution activities to affordably benefit or advance statutory criteria and to be in the public interest, the activity should seek statutory outcomes, the lowest reasonable cost to customers, provide reasonable budget certainty, enable customers to access good benefits, strive to balance the impacts of DSP investment with expected bill impacts from other proceedings, ensure the timing of investments and procurements matches need, and further, the commission should work to ensure that customer bills are made at levels that make it possible for customers to adopt beneficial or transportation electrification. CEO says for activities to satisfy strategically requirements and be in the public interest, the activity should maximize utilization of the system through incorporation of flexible interconnect policies and demand management, encourage the integration of non-traditional and cost-effective solutions, enable access and support to beneficial load growth, and a few other things. Moving along, WRA also notes that the terms are not defined, and that the commission keeps discretion to determine whether an activity qualifies as strategic. They cite another quote from Mr. Eiley at hearing that says strategy is planning a system for longer term set of outcomes, and highlights that integrated need for a broader scope of activities. The commission, WRA reminds the commission that it should recognize its statutory mandate to implement the GMAC, provides it the discretion necessary to modify the GMAC in line with the public interest, and that the legislator did not target a wholesale change to how distribution investments are made and costs are recovered. Instead, they envisioned targeted cost recovery to incentivize certain activities to further specify state goals. Finally, UCA states that the affordably and strategically standard is a materially higher standard than the affordably and reliably standard used in subsection 5A. So only investments that the commission finds affordable and strategic must be recovered through the GMAC. The commission has significant discretion to determine what is affordable and strategic for investments made to modernize the grid. So I just quote those, not necessarily to suggest a specific definition to use, but just to highlight some of the party thoughts on what these kind of nebulous terms of affordable and strategic mean. I think as you go category by category, certain parts of those highlighted quotes might be more relevant to your analysis as to what's strategic and affordable, depending on the proposed activity being discussed. And I'll leave those thoughts with you to start your category analysis.
Thank you. That was very helpful context. Mr. Fetters.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Dundas. So the first category we have on our list is capacity. PSCO suggests that the capacity expansion budget is a type 1 expenditure and belongs in the GMAC in its entirety. In last week's CDM, there was a wealth of conversation about capacity investments in general, so I don't think it needs too much more introduction, so I'll pause for y'all's discussion.
Nicely and quickly framed, so thank you, Mr. Fetters. Commissioner Gumman, what are you thinking? We've talked about it last week. Where are you at now?
Yeah, well, I wish this was easier, but unfortunately, we have the record we have. So I think one thing that's particularly difficult with regard to capacity is that the forecasting provided by the company does not appear to indicate a strategic expansion of the system for some loads. Look, some feeders and substations appear to have existing needs. And then there are some forecasts for loads coming, which I think we have some real strategic concerns about how those loads are projected to hit. Another concern I have in this area is that it's clear the company has and has had in its power different ways in which they could optimize or deploy things like hosting capacity analysis to really enable additional information to go to third parties, to even use internally more up-to-date information in a more automated way to speed up their processes and interconnecting customers, potentially even looking at different interconnection, load availability, and some of those they're significantly behind even their own commitments to deliver on. And then, as we're seeing here, and I think expressed, I don't know what day, maybe that was yesterday, a concern that the company, didn't necessarily have an intent that we think aligns with the statute in terms of deploying flexible interconnection in the way directed by the statute. And then obviously we've got these significant customer service issues, which to some degree are different and to some degree are the same. If it gets to interconnecting DERs or connecting new load, then that kind of directly impacts our ability to strategically hit these state policy objectives. So there certainly are concerns. I think there is evidence that some portion, at least, of this spending is needed, no matter what, will be helpful to pursue those goals. I think a lot of my concern comes around the real missed strategy in how we do this strategically and affordably with regard to the capacity expansion. So I think in alignment with our previous discussions, that would lead me to thinking that a portion only of the capacity expansion should go into the GMAC. Like I've articulated before, that the DSP and the GMAC are kind of the same and kind of different. So to the extent there are needs on the system, the company is still able to make those investments in the system and can expect to bring them to a rate case for cost recovery. The difference in what flows through the GMAC is just what is being specifically incentivized as part of this extraordinary cost recovery for those things that are shown to be strategic and affordably pursuing those goals. So yeah, happy to talk more about percentages, but I don't know if you all are even on the same page with me right now. But my thought here would be to essentially move a portion of the capacity expansion budget into a type 2 rather than a type 1, especially in recognition of the lack of overwhelming strategy provided throughout their case.
Do you have a number?
Probably start at 50%. I mean, I think what's really hard is a lot of the numbers are kind of just aggregated together within this record, and that makes this a more difficult task. I don't like the answer though, that like, well, that means they haven't shown all of its strategic, so it's all out, right? I think it's important, as we discussed before, to have a significant enough incentive to really move toward the goals that we want, rather than just saying we reject because you didn't show that. So I'm happy to hear what you all think. I think it's very unfortunate that, you know, the funding really is not divided in a way where there would be a very clear-cut number. Clearly this would be in excess of what like staff wants to see flowing through the GMAC, and would represent a value in between. But unfortunately, in the way the data is presented, it's very difficult to pinpoint an exact percentage.
And just for discussion purposes, you're thinking 50% for 26, 27, and 28?
That's what I would think. And then clearly in 27 and 28, that could be subject to the performance screens that are in place. You know, in 26, we would just have the interconnection performance screen in place in time, potentially. So I think this wraps up in some part in that discussion, but yeah, that would be my suggestion.
So I guess Commissioner Plan, I don't think we're gonna vote until we go through all the categories. How I feel about capacity depends on where you guys come out on asset health. So for me, it's all interrelated. But where do you come down on capacity, Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I mean, I'm generally of the feeling that the capacity projects would be, you know, what they call type 1 and included in GMAC. I understand Commissioner Gilman's sort of argument that, you know, that we don't have a really good breakout, and, you know, there's been areas of that capacity expansion where we have questions around modeling and things like that. But I don't without a way to really apply you know, some sort of a calculation to come up with that number, I'm having a hard time you know, basically just saying, yeah, half of it is type 2. You know, I'm more inclined to put the capacity projects aside as type 1, and then deal with the other issues of what goes into type 2. But I'm just not sure how to come up with that right number to encapsulate what the concerns are around those capacity.
All right, so you're at 100% on capacity or close to it.
Yeah.
Asset health and reliability. You okay if I just lead the discussion, or did you want to frame up the asset health?
I was wondering where you are on that.
I'm closer to you at 90 to 100%. But a lot depends on where we land on asset health and reliability, because I just have all these incentive issues swirling around, and I care a lot about the bottom line. So on this one, I'm probably closer to you, but I want to see where you both are on asset health before we resolve it. Do you have a framing comments to asset health, or can I jump, Mr. Fetters?
Not much. I think Piesco proposes that asset health and reliability be considered type 1, including its entirety. WR parties, most notably WRA, argues that it should be classified as type 2 rather than type 1. But yeah, y'all have talked about it very much over the last week and over the previous days, so it should be ready.
Do you mind going first again on asset health, Commissioner Goman?
Sure. I would side with WRA here as well. I don't think the company has met their burden to show that these investments would strategically and affordably advance the state goals. Troubling to me in this record was the company does not suggest or commit that these expenditures will increase system reliability. And those are the words in the statute. That's the exact point. So with no estimate of the increase resistance to having any sort of conditions here, it's very difficult to see the line of sight to meeting the statutory requirement for the type 1 consideration.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree. I would not include these in type 1. At best, I'd put them in type 2 or defer to the next rate case. But
I agree with my colleagues. You want to go to the next category, Mr. Fetters?
Yeah. Next up is mandates. Ms. Dundas?
I'm sorry if I just wasn't listening clearly enough, which is probably the case, but that was a vote that asset health is entirely out of the GMAC?
No, it's just not considered a type 1 investment. So
Okay.
it's out of the mandatory investment. We'll come back and see if we want to put some of that in type 2.
Got it. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Dundas. So next item is mandates. The mandate projects are changes made to the distribution system in response to direction from governmental entities. The company divides the mandates category into 2 subcategories. Under Piesco's proposal, discrete routines and programs would be classified as type 2 investments, with Piesco essentially saying that it cannot currently predict how much those investments will or won't further state goals. However, all undergrounding investments within mandates would be classified as type 1, with Piesco arguing that underground lines are inherently more reliable than overhead lines, and so undergrounding advances the legislative goals of improving reliability and resilience. So they're slightly different conversations, but I'll pause for y'all's discussion.
If you're willing to go first again, Commissioner Gilman. You always liked it. I don't know if you like it here.
Some days I like it.
Yeah, I hear that.
So with regard to the first, the discrete routines and programs, I would generally be okay with that going type 2. Clearly it's not type 1, even the company doesn't argue for that. With regard to the undergrounding, I think this should probably follow the path that is followed for asset health and reliability, since that's the main reference here. So I guess as I understood, Chairman, you wanted to come back to the exact treatment of asset health and reliability in terms of if it's type 2 or ordinary course. So I would just suggest that the second would follow along and be a subset of the asset health and reliability.
Commissioner Plant?
yeah, I'd agree with that.
As would I. You want to keep going, Mr. Fetters?
Yeah. Next up is new business, excluding streetlights. This category includes new overhead and underground extensions and services used to extend service to new customers, including the installation or extension of feeders, primary and secondary extensions, service laterals, New business investments are proposed by PSCO to be included in the GMAC as type 2, with PSCO saying that it cannot predict the extent to which these investments would further state goals, and I'll pause for y'all's discussion.
I think that's an easy one on this one. It's clearly not type 1. So anything you'd add, Commissioner Gilman?
No, I think type 2 works, but I don't know if hearing your comment, you're not prepared to make that determination, but I think type 2 is fine here.
Okay, yeah, let's see where we land on a revenue requirement for type 1. And then see if we can structure a type 2 investment would be my proposal. Do you want to keep going through the categories?
I don't think you heard from Commissioner Plant.
Oh, sorry, Commissioner Plant.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Sounds good. Next up is tools and communications. PSCO proposes that tools and fleet investments, which are necessary to support capacity, reliability, and resilience, should be classified as type 1. Other tool investments would be type 2. So given the previous conversation with discussions around capacity, asset health, and reliability and other things, I think there are sort of 3 categories to talk about there, but I'll pause for y'all's discussion.
Commissioner Gilman.
Yeah, I agree with Mr. Fetters to the extent some of these are classified as asset health and reliability, and we have like a discrete dollar amount to understand to allocate to that. That should be treated with asset health and reliability. Same with capacity. And then what was the third? Like locates and miscellaneous. For that, I think the company had already suggested would be type 2, so I think that's reasonable.
So basically, you would find 0 tools qualifies as type 1.
If the capacity, those allocated to capacity would likely follow y'all's discretion for capacity.
So you would put the second category at half of the budget, and the other 2 as type 2.
Yes, but I didn't understand that to be where the 2 of you were going, but yeah, personally.
And do we have the budgets by each of the 3 categories?
I don't believe so. I am not 100% sure that they're out of the record, but generally, as we've tracked up to this point, we have the overall budgets by category, but I don't think the breakout of tools is on the record.
And it's small anyway. Commissioner Plant, do you follow that logic, the 0 for anything that's sort of like asset health, and then 100% for anything that's capacity, or do you see it different?
No, that works for me.
All right. And then what's the last category?
It is Aegis and associated IT costs. So Aegis, I don't remember what it stands for, but it refers to PSCO's Advanced Grid Initiative. And according to PSCO's proposal, specifically within their fault location, isolation, and service restoration, or FLISR projects, and advanced outage management projects should be considered type 1 activities. PSCO asserts that they improve reliability and resiliency by helping optimize the function of the grid. No party specifically opposes the proposed categorization of these Aegis investments, but I'll pause for y'all's discussion.
Commissioner Gilman, type 1, not type 1.
I mean, I think as with some of these things, intuitively it would make sense that that would help the reliability of the grid. Part of the problem is it wasn't part of the company's case at all to suggest that it would improve reliability with any sort of metrics. So I think that remains a concern. So curious your persuasions on this.
So you would be 0.
I would be type 2. I'm having a little trouble with the 0 discussion. They're going to spend this money.
No, but you would not define it as type 1 for mandatory GMAC recovery.
Correct. I mean, if the argument is reliability, it's in the same bucket. Largely, it's asset health and reliability with no real showing by the company as to a commitment to increases in reliability, which was the core state goal I think this is going to achieve.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree.
As do I. All right. Let's go back and look at capacity. I have a $413 million budget in 2026. Is that right, or is that 2025? No, it's 2026. 413 in 2026, 478 million in 2027, and 472 million in 2028. So, Commissioner Gilman, it sounded like you were half of that.
Correct.
And then it sounds like the revenue requirement calculation was maybe half of that again. So what would you do? What would you like to see for a GMAC revenue requirement, or would you not try and take it to a GMAC revenue requirement and you just say, this is what you find to be type 1 investment and let the company do it, or we could do it in a technical conference? Thoughts about how you get from your capital spending to a GMAC revenue requirement?
I mean, I think Mr. Fetters probably knows better than us, but to me, I think we dictate what they've articulated that qualifies as type 1, and then the company should utilize that in their filing. I didn't anticipate kind of sitting here today crunching all the numbers. I mean, I think this is really an assessment as to if they met the statutory requirement or not for each category. And I think based on the statute, like that's kind of what needs to drive us, not necessarily what the end number comes out. The end number comes out, but meets that statutory definition.
All right. So go ahead, Mr. Fetters.
Yeah, I think a couple things real quick. On the revenue requirement discussion, I do generally agree mechanically that there are a lot of elements that will have to sort of fall out based on the overall budget number. The biggest impact there, I think, is that the company is proposing a 13-month average for the revenue requirement calculation. And even though we have the budget numbers by year, I don't believe the actual month by month capital investments are on the record in this case. They only show the 13-month average in the revenue requirement calculation, and even that is only shown at a total of their type 1 categories. So it mixes in asset health and reliability along with that. And so to go from the capacity budget to an overall revenue requirement definitely requires to do it precisely would require additional information that would work for a technical conference. And I have one other thing after that also. That Ms. Dundas just reminded me that we had not talked about EADA yet. It was not on my list right here because it was up above. But if we want to talk about that, we can also do that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Why don't we introduce the EADA? Commissioner Gilman, how do you feel about that?
Do you want Mr. Fetters to?
Oh, yeah. Well, you want to introduce it? It's already been introduced a couple times.
The short version is EADA is currently being recovered in the TCAD, which I believe y'all voted to roll in the other TCAD costs into the GMAC earlier this morning. The EADA is about a $5.4 million revenue requirement at this time, and they propose about $6 million worth of investments or so over the next 3 years that, according to the company's proposal, would go through the GMAC along with the existing revenue requirement that would be rolled in.
So the total capital is $6 million. The revenue requirement would be under $1 million.
The revenue requirement right now is 5.4 million. So the additional revenue requirement, it would ramp up from about 5.4 million right now, which is being recovered in the TCAD, and so would just be movement. But the addition there would be something under $1 million.
Okay. Do you have a preference on this one, Commissioner Gilman?
No, I'm fine with rolling the EADA into the GMAC.
Commissioner Plant?
Yeah, I agree.
All right. All right, just so on the type 1, Commissioner Gilman, it sounded like you were basically half of the capacity budget with a little bit for half of the second category B and the EADA. Would you implement that as a cap? I guess my preference would be to just cap the type 1 GMAC recovery based on these findings and not allow it to adjust as the company moves money around. But how do you think about that? Are you capping the capital spending at your amounts, or would you allow it for adjustments? I think that's a later issue. Is that right, Mr. Fetters?
I'm honestly not 100% sure. But y'all are certainly welcome to talk about it here. Mr. Mendelson?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, we are going to bring that back, some of the step 1 issues of total spending and whether the commission has an opinion there or guidance to the company.
I'd like to cap it based on this record if that works for Mr. Dundas, Ms. Dundas.
I think what you're referring to as a later decision point is that discussion from CEO about whether it's like a project certain list or there's abilities to add throughout the year. So Mr. Mendelson kind of answered that we will also discuss like the overall budget at some point, but I think more relevant to this discussion is what you're actually approving as a revenue requirement, whether that is like a total dollars to be spent or total dollars associated with projects that you've identified here, something like that.
Commissioner Goman, are you all right? I mean, I would prefer to have it be a total dollar cap in terms of capital expenses that's deemed to be type 1 and eligible for GMAC. Does that work for you, or do you see it different? And you don't have to decide now. We can bring this back, or you can hear from.
Yeah, I mean, I think that generally works. Yeah, I mean, it's hard if this is a prospective determination that the funding is strategically and affordably advancing a state goal, and then they change what they did for that money. That is an inherently difficult situation to consider.
I think if this decision is what we do, everything's going to be capacity.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't know. I think we can talk about that in the cleanup. Is it better like a project certain list or a cap or I'm trying to think it through, especially under all the moving parts from today. It is just tough. Like there's a part of me that's like, if we're like you want to be able to be dynamic enough to adjust to where you're seeing the needs on the system, but at the same time, this is a massive plan, a massive amount of spending. If there was something that was not even conceived now that then is necessary gets done instead, I further cause into question the strategy involved here and what we're doing.
Well,
yeah.
For me, maybe I'll go first. For me, I'd like to cap the capital spending that's type 1 that can flow through the GMAC. So that's a fixed amount. But if they want to move projects around, that I'd provide that flexibility. But the GMAC, for affordability reasons, is just capped in this case as part of our decision here. But Commissioner Plant, thoughts on that?
So just to clarify, you're saying that type 1 activities within the GMAC would be capped based on this current what they put in their plan, basically.
And based on their plan and what we approve as strategic and affordable and advancing the statutory goals would be capped in this case.
And then
And
other things could then be proposed to go into type 2 within the GMAC, but not as a type 1. Because the
correct.
question is it strategic if it just got added? Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
All right. And then for you, Commissioner Plant, you would approve the 413, the 478, and the 472 associated with a company's plan for capacity flowing through into the GMAC revenue requirement as type 1.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit of the tools and the EADA.
Yeah.
All right, I'm probably with you on this, Commissioner Plant, and would like to see the larger GMAC based on my reading of what the legislature intended. But let's talk about the type 2 incentives that you're willing to see in the performance-based GMAC. Mr. Fetters, do you have a way of framing that?
Sure. So just to recap, it sounds like capacity, and I don't think we have a decisive vote yet on exactly how much capacity.
I want to see before we lock in the type 1, let's go through the type 2 so we can see what alignment we have on the type 2.
Okay. So categories that y'all determined are decisively not type 1 over the previous minutes include asset health and reliability, mandates, including all levels of mandates, new business, tools and communications that do not support capacity specifically, and FLIZR and advanced outage management projects within the Aegis IT bucket.
So, Commissioner Gellman, of the remaining type 2 categories, any thoughts on what you'd see in terms of what you'd be willing to do a performance-based accelerated cost recovery on in terms of capital flowing through the GMAC? Do you have any guidance on your thinking, or do you want me to go first, or where would you like to go?
Great question. Yeah, you can let me know what you're thinking and be happy to respond.
I mean, I'd probably do something like half of asset health, maybe a third of asset health, somewhere between I don't know exactly what the dollar amount is, but some portion of asset health in 2027 I'd make available. Yeah, say half to a type 2 cost recovery, and then maybe a little more for 2028. So if it came down to a revenue requirement, maybe 15 million in 2020, in the 2026 advice letter filing for 2027, and maybe more like 25 million, or say 10 million. So maybe more like a third of it in 2027 and more like 60% in 2028. So it'd be an extra $10 million revenue requirement in 2027 and maybe an extra 25 million in 2028. So it'd be a massive performance-based incentive. And I'd make a lot of it contingent on them just changing this framework, so it dynamically integrates supply and demand, and they just got to get the Bs, the EVs off peak. So I'm really thinking about trying to reverse the incentives in current regulation in this case. But I have no idea what you're thinking. I could guess on the rest.
Yeah, I mean, my general thought was I'd be okay with I mean, I understand it's really at our discretion at this point if and to what extent these costs would go into a type 2 category and provide GMAC recovery. Certainly hesitant to provide any asset health and reliability in 2026, given that there is no performance criteria that would really in any way tether to that. And and I think a core issue in this case being that the company wouldn't, commit or suggest any improvements to their reliability based on what are really very significant levels of investment. So I'm with you on the timing, probably, that I think the earliest we could do it is 27, 28 to bring it in to a type 2 that is subject to performance screens. I had considered that would probably happen in total. That like once you hit 2027 and have a performance screen that appropriately tracks reliability, that the entirety of it would be subject to that. So that was how I was thinking of it.
I'd ask if you rethink that, just because I don't think we can do a BEEV load shape screen for the 2027 spending. I think we could do it for the 2028 spending. And for me, as you said, I think that's like at the core of what we're doing here. So I would prefer to see bigger dollars in the 27 advice letter filing for 28 than I would in the first year, where it's just reliability and customer service, which they should be fixing anyway. So I see that the 2027 capital spending being relatively modest. I mean, still hundreds of millions of dollars of potential accelerated cost recovery. But for me, the bigger one is really shifting the load shape. So I just urge you to be open to doing it a little in a phased and increasing way.
Yeah, and just to be clear, when you say 2027 capital spending, you mean specific to the GMAC?
Yeah, it's a type 2 GMAC recovery.
Higher capital spending. It's difficult that we're doing these two things at once.
Yeah, because there's three. There's also ordinary course rate case recovery.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I can consider that. I think we have some details of this, to work out, but I think what it would be is like implementation of the type 2 activities of the type 2 activities in terms of the portion we're willing to make available in the GMAC with regard to performance screens, kind of phased in an approach that allows for the entirety of those performance screens to be implemented.
And again, for me, I'd cap it at the 10 million revenue requirement, or maybe 12 million or something like that in 2027, but would go up to something like 25 million in 2028 capital spending. So I just throw that out there. Think about it.
Yeah, I guess what would be helpful kind of in the meantime, Mr. Fetters, is as we finalize this in the next week to come up with some common reporting or communication. Are we talking capital dollars or revenue requirement? I think Mr. Fetters had indicated it's very difficult to turn these into a revenue requirement. I think we need to probably talk consistently about capital dollars.
Fair enough.
I don't want to have apples and oranges in a way that like no one can.
So I'd propose maybe $120 million for the 2027 and maybe 250 for the 2028. Commissioner Plant, anywhere you'd like to go?
Sorry, I'm trying to look at the table and see how all this makes sense. Uh, so first of all, what would happen with 2026?
0.
So all 2026 would go into the next rate case, basically.
Yeah. No
Um,
accelerated cost recovery of type 2 for 2026.
and then 2027, I think a total for asset health and reliable is 341, and you were saying 100
20 million, something like that.
120. So yeah, third-ish. And then 2028
Like 200 or 250 million.
to go up like three-quarters. And then the balance of those would go into just rate case for each of them.
Yeah. And I'm not saying, I mean, to get the big reward, they'd really have to significantly change what they're doing and document it that, they're really getting this stuff off peak.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sympathetic to the objective. I just want to kind of think through the potential consequences of pushing, as I said, pushing 2026 recovery out beyond 2027 spending. I don't want to
Yeah.
put in that kind of disincentive, but yeah, I am sympathetic to the, waiting out to apply more of the performance around load shape. Um, but maybe we can kind of think about it and what the implications of that might be and how it might be structured.
I I think that's as much as we're gonna be able to do today without all three of us having time to think through what we heard today and to get some time with advisors and counsel. Ms. Dundas, do you have something you want to add to this?
No, maybe that was a little premature to hop on. I was going to suggest we stop there. There's also a lot of data access issues that we could continue to use for this last half hour if there's interest in that.
Um, yeah, I have a lunch at noon. I can be a little late. I'm just meeting at some friend's house, but you want to spend another 20 minutes? Um, and I guess for you both, could you do a long CWM next week, maybe going into the afternoon? I think I mean, I've got an email from Ron who thinks we got a packed agenda next week, and I think we're gonna need another bit on this.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm open.
All right. So with that, why don't we do another 15 minutes today on HCA, and then we'll just plan on a long CWM next week. And if you guys can just hold until the early afternoon, that'd be great. Mr. Fetters.
Sounds good. So now we're going to get back to talking about hosting capacity analyses, or HCAs, and related issues. Yesterday we discussed security around the generation and load HCA maps. Today we are going to get into other HCA related topics. But before we resume our list of decision points, there's one bonus decision point related to HCA security, which we wanted to walk through to wrap up that conversation. And that basically is how, now that it's been established that the unblurred generation HCA map and load map should be public insofar that there is no NDA requirement, how exactly should the maps be made available? As discussed yesterday, at this time, in order to access the unblurred generation map, users are required to fill out an access request form, sign the NDA, and then, if approved, sign in through a secure web portal to see the information. While some parties did give examples of utilities which make unblurred maps available on public-facing websites, no party has opposed the requirement that users authenticate before accessing the HCA data, and in its SOP, IREC endorses the company's practice of requiring users to authenticate before accessing HCA data, saying that it mitigates the risk of someone using the data to cause harm without hindering access to data for legitimate purposes. And I can pause for discussion or have a recommendation.
Yeah, if you can give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
Advisors recommend maintaining PSCo's currently existing authentication process minus the NDA as discussed yesterday. No party opposes the authentication requirement, and it does provide some insurance of legitimate use of data without being overly burdensome.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you, commissioners. The next decision point is the cadence of HCA updates. As background, in the settlement in the previous DSP, the company agreed to update HCA data and maps on a quarterly basis beginning on July 1st, 2023. However, since then, the company has not yet achieved a quarterly cadence. Currently, the maps are updated annually, and data cutoff windows can make the maps even more out of date than that cadence would suggest. In this DSP, PSCo indicates that it is targeting quarterly updates within 2025 and monthly updates in 2026 or 2027. Parties in this proceeding argue that there is limited value in HCA that is only updated once per year. ACE warns that the outdated maps could lead to the selection of sites that seem to have available capacity but are actually saturated. IREC emphasizes the importance of more frequent updates of HCAs in a world of changing grid conditions and also warns of deterring applications for areas which may have had upgrades since the HCA map was published and thus now have capacity. Even PSCo agrees that more rapid updates of HCAs would be beneficial for other stakeholders, but also for the company, in that more frequent updates would result in fewer and more targeted applications for customers, thus reducing the engineering work needed to evaluate those applications. PSCo states that the goal is monthly updates, but opposes a specific deadline for monthly updates to be achieved. The company states that it has been working on automating portions of the HCA process, which would facilitate more frequent updates, but that this work has been taking longer than anticipated. IREC recommends that PSCo be required to publish monthly updates by the end of 2026, and in the interim, be required to provide an update in December 2025 using a data cutoff no later than October 2025. IREC asserts that there is no minimum to update frequency for HCAs, and that the goal is real-time updates, which have been achieved by other utilities such as Hawaiian Electric, and the monthly updates are actually a compromise from that. ACE also recommends that monthly updates be required by the end of 2026, and that PSCo be required to publish an updated HCA within 30 days of the final decision in this proceeding, along with quarterly updates thereafter through manual processes until automation is achieved. Additionally, ACE recommends that the Commission direct that it will assess civil penalties if PSCo fails to comply with HCA deadlines, and even to consider assessing penalties for past noncompliance, specifically the deadline of quarterly updates established in the last DSP. AEU also agrees that the Commission should establish a deadline for monthly updates and calls a deadline of late 2026 reasonable. And Tesla also agrees there is limited value in HCA only updated once per year, likening the process to a battleship type search for capacity if no good information is available. So I can pause for your discussion and also have a recommendation if you would like.
I'd like.
Advisors recommend requiring PSCo to publish monthly updates by the end of 2026 as recommended by IREC and ACE. Advisors also additionally recommend requiring an update within 60 days of the final decision in this proceeding using cutoff data no further back than September 2025 and quarterly updates subsequent to that. The record in this proceeding shows the substantial benefits of a more frequent HCA update schedule and the risks of relying on out-of-date HCA data. And while PSCo has described challenges with the automation process, it is also the case that PSCo is capable of manually updating the HCA maps and has not done so in a way that complies with even the previous DSP settlement up to this point. Advisors do not recommend assessing a penalty at this time, but given the inarguable benefits of more frequent updates and the failure to meet the cadence of updates required in the previous DSP, if PSCo does not achieve improvements to the HCA process, the Commission could potentially have staff explore penalties through the show cause process.
Commissioner Gilman?
Thanks, Mr. Fetters. Yeah, I generally agree with your recommendation in terms of the timelines and cadence upon which to require This is clearly a massive frustration point in this proceeding among most of the parties here. You know, the company has completely failed to live up to its commitments from a 2022 settlement agreement and couldn't even really articulate what the plan ever was to meet those in terms of timeline and RFP and technology deployment. So that's certainly been very frustrating. And, you know, I kind of worry really may harm the company's ability to work with these parties in good faith. There's a lot of goodwill potentially lost on this failure and the real frustration of those parties who were intending and hoping to use this data in a beneficial way. The other thing that's really unfortunate about it is as we move to automation, you know, it very much sounded like in this record, there are potential benefits to the company, even internally, in terms of speeding up some of their use of their own data, and all of that has been lost up till now. And so certainly like to see a focus on getting this done on time. If show cause is really a method that's going to get us to compliance here, I don't know, but I think we would very much need to be exploring different compliance methods coming out of this if we continue to see the company not being able to fulfill its obligations related to publishing those HCA maps and the cadence that's required.
I mean, I agree, and I'd love to see the language that I'd love to see what Commissioner Gilman just said in our order, characterizing where we're at as context for all these decisions and the commission's frustration with the utility. Commissioner Plant,
Yeah, I agree. Nothing to add.
Mr. Fetters.
Thank you, commissioners. The next subject is temporal granularity. Hosting capacity can inherently vary throughout the day and the year. Load and generation will naturally fluctuate throughout the day and by the season, which will affect hosting capacity. At this time, Public Service's load and generation HCAs look at a single point in time, which represents the daytime maximum loading scenario. However, more granular time series analyses can also be conducted, looking at how much hosting capacity is available during other periods. In its hosting capacity roadmap within the DSP, Public Service targets 8760 analysis in 2026 or 2027, which would represent visibility into hosting capacity at every hour of the year. However, IREC points out 8760-hour analyses, while thorough, can create computational and modeling challenges, and suggests that once full 8760 data is available, that PSCO also publish 576-hour analyses. Under IREC's proposal, a 576-hour analysis would look at 24 hours per month for both load and generation, which IREC asserts would provide meaningful hosting capacity variation while still being more feasible and practical than a full 8760. IREC recommends that the Commission require 576-hour analyses be published by the end of 2027. ACE additionally recommends that both 576 and 8760 analyses be published by the end of 2027, agreeing with IREC these models can enable limited load and generation profiles and be used to facilitate flexible interconnection. In rebuttal, PSCO disagrees with requiring a deadline for temporal granularity, reiterates that the 8760 analysis is in its roadmap for 2027 and that it has begun studying flexible interconnection, but is still working through the logistics of scaling their analyses to the entire system. So I can pause for questions or have a recommendation.
Nah, if you can give us a recommendation, that'd be great.
Advisors recommend requiring Public Service to publish 576 and 8760-hour results by the end of 2027. Doing so would align with flexible interconnection development and associated requirements in future DSPs, and consistent with the cadence of HCA updates, establishing a deadline should help keep Public Service on track to achieve HCA improvements.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you, commissioners. We're now going to go through a handful of more specific improvements to the HCA recommended by parties, and we'll take them one by one, but they should hopefully go pretty quickly. The first on the list is combining HCA maps. Currently, Public Service's load and generation maps are completely separate from one another, and as discussed, have historically had different levels of restrictions. As part of their larger recommendation on HCA maps, IREC recommends that PSCO be required to publish a single map which displays both substation and distribution line information for load and generation. IREC asserts that doing so would make for a better user experience, allow for greater visibility into the distribution system, and lead to more efficient use of the HCA. In rebuttal, Public Service states that it is focusing its HCA improvement efforts on other areas such as automation, and also point out technical challenges with pop-up data and layering that would come along with combining the maps. However, they also state that they would be open to suggestions for improvement in the longer term. And I have a recommendation on this one.
That'd be great.
Advisors recommend not requiring PSCO to combine maps at this time, but rather to report on the possibility and progress on combining maps in its next DSP. Advisors see the advantages of combining maps presented by IREC, but ultimately see a combined map as a nice to have and agree with PSCO that there are several greater priorities in the HCA space at this time.
Commissioner Goman.
Thanks, Mr. Fetters. Yeah, I generally agree this is not the top priority with regard to the HCA development. I will point out that we're kind of in a period of development of their capabilities much more generally in HCA. So I certainly expect that they will be trying to figure out in the interim if their changes in platform and automation allow this to happen. There's no reason to like skip that step if that could be embedded in what is being done now. But I agree with the general premise that this is a secondary wish list or hope for it. So as a backstop, yes, I'd like to see it reported in the next DSP on the capabilities, but I certainly would not expect that the company would overlook those capabilities if they appear to be readily available within the process changes they're already making.
Commissioner Plant.
I agree.
As do I.
Thank you. And yeah, we can add some language essentially encouraging them to do it as part of the HCA process to the extent possible, but certainly requiring an update one way or the other by the next DSP.
Yeah, it just wouldn't make any sense if the entire ambition is like not even looked at as we're going. If there's an opportunity there, it should be explored.
Sure. The next item we have is pop-up boxes. In answer testimony, IREC observes that PSCO's unblurred generation map shows substantially less information in its pop-up boxes than either the blurred maps pop-up boxes or the associated generation tabular data. IREC states that the blurred generations map pop-up box contains 27 values, while the unblurred maps pop-up box contains only 5 values. Similarly, the load tabular data contains 20 values, while the load map only shows 6. In its rebuttal, the company confirms that the discrepancy in the pop-up boxes is an error, that the unblurred boxes, the ones displayed on their website, that the unblurred boxes, the ones behind the web portal, should contain all of the fields shown in the blurred boxes, the ones on their public-facing website, and tabular data, and that the company will make the change. However, IREC points out in its SOP that the company has not agreed to a defined timeline for making the change. Accordingly, advisors recommend that within 30 days of the final decision in this case, PSCO should make a filing to confirm that the pop-up boxes have been fixed or state that they have not. And to the extent the pop-up boxes have not been fixed by that filing date, PSCO should be required to fix the pop-up boxes by the end of 2026 when they update to monthly HCA updates.
Commissioner Goman.
I agree.
Commissioner Plant.
I agree.
As do I.
Thank you. Next up is the user guide. In answer testimony, IREC recommended that Public Service be required to publish an user guide that explains how to access and navigate the HCA maps, how to download data, and all key terms and assumptions contained in the maps. However, during the course of the proceeding, Public Service confirmed that a guide does already exist on its public website. In light of this, IREC asks in its SOP for the Commission to ensure that the user guide applies to both the load generation HCAs, explains all terms used in the maps and tabular data, lists each of the technical criteria and how the relevant thresholds are determined, and is updated periodically to reflect any changes to the HCA or how the map is displayed. and advisors recommend that PSCo confirm that the user guide contains that information in that same filing within 30 days of the final decision as the pop-up box discussion does just before, or if information is missing, add the missing information to the user guide by the end of 26.
Commissioner Goman,
Yeah, I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you. If it works, Chair Blank, I'm just going to keep going until you say we should be wrapping it up.
Yeah, assume it'll be noon. Say it'll be noon.
Okay. Next up is validation of the HCA. Validation is the term used for checking that the HCA's simulation of hosting capacity actually aligns with real grid conditions. In the 2022 DSP settlement, Public Service agreed to validate HCA results for 5 different areas across the system and did so in this DSP. The validation revealed mismatch in one of the 5 locations, which the company described as being due to GIS mapping errors, which are updated as they are found. In its HCA roadmap, Public Service lists validation against interconnection study results in its long-term column, indicating 2028 or later. IREC says that PSCo should be ordered to submit a detailed validation plan within 6 months of the final decision in this proceeding, including validation objectives and timelines, plus an opportunity for stakeholder comments and improvements. IREC claims that validation is essential to ensure that inputs reflect real-world conditions, and note that utilities in Minnesota, Massachusetts, and California have had HCAs with nodes showing little to no hosting capacity available, but could, in actuality, accommodate new generation. Cross-answer testimony, AEU also agrees with IREC's recommendation. In rebuttal, Public Service agrees that validation is important and says that it is working on its validation process and in particular automating aspects of the process. However, PSCo disagrees with IREC's recommendation for a plan, stating its focus is implementing the tools to facilitate that automation. So I can pause for discussion or have a recommendation.
Yeah, if you have a recommendation, that'd be great.
Advisors recommend requiring Public Service to submit a validation plan within 6 months of the decision as recommended by IREC. Advisors agree with the importance of validating the HCAs, and while Public Service's focus is on automation, given the related HCA timelines discussed earlier, they should be able to provide validation timeline information in that context.
Commissioner Goman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you, Commissioners. Next up is downloadable data. IREC recommends the Commission order PSCo to include download links in the pop-up boxes, which produce a CSV file with all the basic grid data on that line, such as technical criteria and host capacity values. IREC argues that pop-up boxes may not be large enough to contain all the data that developers would find useful, and that the downloadable data would make for more efficient use of the HCA. ACE also notes that Commission Rule 3541A requires users to be able to download data in tabular and geospatial formats. And advisors recommend that PSCo be required to allow for data to be downloaded from the pop-up boxes consistent with IREC's recommendation by the end of 2026.
Commissioner Goman,
Yeah, I agree with IREC's recommendation.
whose
Yeah.
recommendation?
Sorry, sorry. Sorry, can you repeat the recommendation, Mr. Fetters?
IREC's recommendation is that PSCo be required to allow for data to be downloaded from the pop-up boxes by the end of 2026, which is what advisors recommend as well.
Yeah.
I thought you said RX recommendation.
So same recommend. Sorry, you had me scared. I was like, wait a minute. Yeah, advisory recommendation, IREC's recommendation, which are one and the same in this situation.
Yeah, sorry for the confusion. I thought you said RX. I'm like, what?
Eric, IREC, I agree as well.
That's do I.
Excellent. Thank you, Commissioners. Next are nodal results and limiting criteria. Nodes refer to sectionalizing devices like voltage regulators or capacitors, which divide feeders into line sections that can potentially have varying levels of hosting capacity. Public Service produces hosting capacity analyses at the nodal level for internal use and is part of the generating as part of generating the HCA data and maps that are ultimately published. However, the HCA maps and tabular data available to external users only provide ranges for whole feeders rather than specific nodal data. The load map developed specifically for this proceeding does display nodal results, but as discussed earlier, has not been published outside of this proceeding up to this point. IREC recommends that the company publish nodal results for its load and generation HCAs. IREC points out limitations of feeder level data. For instance, they note that over 80% of the feeders in the generation data show between 0 megawatts and 10 megawatts. IREC contrasts that with an example from National Grid's HCA map, where a feeder level map shows hosting capacity in excess of 5 megawatts over the whole feeder, but certain segments on that same feeder have capacity as low as 0.29 megawatts. IREC also notes that Excel publishes nodal results in its Minnesota operating company's HCA. IREC also recommends that the company provide comprehensive limiting criteria for each node. Beyond just the single hosting capacity number, hosting capacity analyses also provide information on the constraints on hosting capacity known as limiting criteria. Limiting criteria can be categorized as voltage, thermal, or protection related. IREC asserts that all limiting criteria should be published, not just the single most limiting constraint. Give an example that a voltage constraint could be addressed with smart inverter settings, but a thermal constraint on top of that could be more expensive and time consuming. In rebuttal, Public Service says that it is amenable to evaluating the feasibility of incorporating nodal data into pop-up boxes. However, it also warns that providing this information could increase visibility into system vulnerabilities and emphasizes concern about information becoming available to bad actors. Similarly, in discovery responses to IREC, PSCO asserted that public knowledge of limiting criteria and thresholds could expose vulnerabilities to the system. So I could pause for questions or have a recommendation.
Yeah, we'd welcome a recommendation.
Advisors recommend requiring PSCO to publish results for its load and generation HCAs at the nodal level, along with the limiting criteria information for each load, without being restricted behind the NDA as discussed earlier. As with those earlier issues, the value of this information is substantial and the risks alluded to by Public Service are vague and speculative.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you, commissioners. Next are distribution lines and substation locations. At this time, substation locations are not included on HCA maps at all. Distribution line locations are published on the unblurred generation map and load map, but not on the blurred map or in the tabular data. IREC recommends that PSCO be ordered to make distribution lines and substations locations available without an NDA. In IREC's testimony, as an example of the usefulness of distribution line information, IREC shows a public map from Southern California Edison service territory, which shows circuits that would support generation on one side of a shopping mall, but not the other. IREC argues that it would not be possible to analyze project options to this level of detail with blurred locations of lines. Regarding substations, IREC argues that proximity to substations can indicate more capacity is available because of less voltage drop and can influence reconductoring costs as well. And on this one, given the changes in security discussed earlier, IREC recommend basically no change to the distribution line presentation in PSCO's HCA maps. Now that the NDA will be eliminated, only showing the lines on the unblurred map is reasonable. However, as the substation locations are not included on the HCA maps at all, advisors do recommend requiring Public Service to include substation locations on the unblurred maps going forward.
Commissioner Gilman,
I agree.
Commissioner Plant,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you, commissioners. Just a couple other items in the HCA section. Regarding the list of AVPP feeders eligible for compensation, in the AVPP settlement, which was outlined earlier by Mr. Eden, paragraph 23 reads, the company will provide geospatial data regarding feeders eligible for the distribution compensation as described in the company's rebuttal testimony, provided, however, that the terms of access to geospatial data regarding feeders eligible for the distribution compensation remains in dispute and may be further litigated in this proceeding or in other relevant proceedings. Public Service's position is that the list of AVPP feeders is highly sensitive data, which would be disclosed through the secure web portal, which historically has required the signing of the same NDA currently required to access the HCA maps. ACE asserts that the feeder list should be public, that designating the feeders as confidential would prevent aggregators from recruiting customers located on those feeders, and that the company has failed to demonstrate why the feeder list requires confidential treatment. Indeed, ACE says that the company has not provided any written justification for the disclosure being harmful, in contrast to its arguments on the HCA maps. AEU also recommends the company provide the list of eligible feeders publicly. AEU notes that Senate Bill 24-218 requires streamlined and reasonable data requirements for participation and asserts that the non-standard NDA does not align with this, and echoes ACE's arguments that making the feeder list public is crucial for the success of the AVPP program. The customers would be unable to understand if their property is on a feeder eligible for compensation under this arrangement, and that the company has not justified the confidentiality of the list. So I can pause for discussion or have a recommendation.
A recommendation would be great.
On this, advisors recommend making the AVPP feeder list public. Advisors agree with the importance of being able to share this information with eligible customers and the lack of support for keeping it even behind a less restrictive NDA.
Commissioner Gutman,
I agree.
Commissioner Platt,
I agree.
as do I.
Thank you, commissioners. The last item in the HCA space, and there will be Green Button Connect stuff for later, but in the HCA space is what is known as the 1515 rule, and for that I'll pass it off to Mr. Foreman of your commission council.
Mr. Foreman.
Good morning, commissioners. Barely. Wyatt Foreman of your commission council. I believe this is the final HCA decision point, and the decision point here is whether public service should revise its HCA maps to include feeder information that it currently excludes pursuant to Rule 3033B. In its application, public service explains that feeders that violate Commission Rule 3033B, also known as the 1515 rule, will not be mapped behind the company's secure web portal. For reference, the 1515 rule states that when sharing customer information in aggregate, a particular aggregation must contain at least 15 customers, and within any customer class, no single customer's customer data or premise associated with a single customer's customer data may comprise 15% or more of the total customer data aggregated per customer class to generate the aggregated data report. IREC and Boulder argue the company is misapplying the 1515 rule in the HCA mapping context. Boulder highlights that the company's application of the rule excludes 180 of 809 total feeders, or about 22% of the company's overall feeders, including the location of the feeders and all associated data, which Boulder argues obfuscates important HCA information and would create confusion for developers interpreting the HCA maps. Both parties also emphasize that the HCA maps are produced through the use of power flow modeling tools, which use aggregated customer data as only one of multiple inputs to develop the models. Boulder emphasizes that public service considers HCA a high-level representation of system limits, and Boulder asserts the record establishes it would be impossible to reverse engineer from the outputs of this modeling an accurate estimate of any one customer's specific energy usage, and therefore contends the 1515 rule does not require exclusion of HCA data. IREC, on the other hand, presents a framework for analyzing the HCA maps that divides the information currently published or requested in the maps into three categories. IREC describes the first category as information about the equipment on the grid and its location, such as substation name, transformer voltage, feeder location, and whether a feeder is networked or radial. Like Boulder, IREC asserts these data types do not contain customer data, as defined by Commission Rules 3001C and 3001K, which define aggregated and customer data respectively, and the company should therefore be required to publish all of what it calls Category 1 data. IREC described a second category of data that concerns direct information about loading of the equipment on the system, such as the substation transformer minimum load and the feeder minimum load, among other things. IREC asserts this is the exact type of data that the 1515 rule should protect, and the company should redact this type of data where the 1515 rule properly applies. As an example, IREC states that if the company determines that there are fewer than 15 customers, or that one customer's data may comprise more than 15% of the total load for a feeder, then it should redact the feeder minimum load for that feeder. Finally, IREC describes a third category of data that includes modeled outputs that use the previously described load data as an input, along with other information to produce HCA results. IREC asserts the hosting capacity analysis produces results for multiple limiting or technical criteria, and that these results typically do not disclose historical or real-time usage, and nor do they reveal key infrastructure parameters like conductor size or relay settings that would be necessary to reverse engineer customer-specific data. So IREC therefore asserts the company should publish the HCA results unless the company can demonstrate for specific technical criteria that customer load data can be disaggregated from the result. And I can go ahead and offer a recommendation.
That'd be great.
Council and advisors recommend the commission adopt IREC's position here. Council agrees with IREC's interpretation of the 1515 rule and the commission's rules defining aggregated and customer data in this context. Council recommends that the commission find the 1515 rule should not be read to require redactions of feeders on the HCA maps, except to the extent outlined by IREC to protect customer data. And if there is a dispute regarding potential customer disaggregation, appropriate filings can then be made.
Commissioner Gutman,
I agree.
Commissioner Platt,
I agree.
as do I, and I think we should call it a day, if that's all right with you guys. Mr. Fetters, Mr. Mendelson.
That sounds good. And we'll try to complete next CWM next Wednesday.
Yeah, and I think we've carved out a bunch of time. I know we got the on-bill finance discussion, but we'll stay as long as we need to next Wednesday. So thanks all. I think we're getting there. See you next time.